The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is one of the most controversial events in the history of mankind. And what's interesting about this pact is that people of all ideologies, from Putin to Dugin to Ben Shapiro, all of them have their own bizarre takes on this event, and all of them have their own great narrative about what this pact means for the nature of ideology. And after I give you a short overview of all the other takes that already exist on this topic, I will give you my take. So for the liberals and for the moderate right-wingers, the Pact Molotov-Ribbentrop is essentially seen as a proof that Stalinism is just as bad as fascism, and some even go a step further and say that Stalinism essentially became fascism, and that distinctions that exist between fascism and Stalinism are more of an aesthetic and an arbitrary thing. And what's funny about this, the Trotskyites even agree with this take that I actually heard formulated by the figures like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, but I still strongly disagree with this idea that Stalinism is essentially fascism. And by the way, I'm not saying this even as necessarily as a defense of Stalinism, because Stalinism engages in a very specific form of evil. Let us for a moment appreciate and explain what happened in the Soviet Union during the dekulakization period. And by the way, before I tell you something about that, I just want to emphasize what Hitler said before he attacked the Soviet Union. Hitler famously said, "Now finally I no longer feel like a hypocrite." So the far-right people, they still see Bolshevism as the ultimate enemy, while the moderate right-wingers, they see essentially Bolshevism and fascism as a very similar form of evil. And that take is especially popular in the United States, probably because both Hitler and Stalin were the enemies of the United States, so people usually have this tendency to put all of their enemies in the same box, in the same way in which for example, Israelis compare Hamas to ISIS, but upon closer inspection, you actually find out that the two groups dislike each other very much. But okay, let us now return to to what I wanted to tell you about the kulaks in the Soviet Union. So why did Stalin kill rich peasants? Well, if you look at his ideology, he argues that they are evil because they hold to the grain just for themselves and their families while the others starve. So Stalin was killing them because they were rich. And Hitler, well, Hitler, he would never do such a thing. For him, it was all about race. Well, for Stalin, at least in theory, well, he did dog whistle to Russian nationalists and he did utilize nationalism, but still, for him, the most important thing in the world was class and class struggle, because he was a Marxist. And even if you believe he was essentially lying when he said so, that is still his official ideology. Well, on the other hand, for Hitler, it was all about race. Here you can see how the Nazis depicted the Jews, and Hitler would just as gladly kill the richest Jew in the world as he would a homeless Jewish person, because for Hitler it was all about race, and some races were just genetically evil. And as one famous Nazi general said, some people don't have the right to exist. That perfectly captures the spirit of Hitler's racism. While on the other hand, here we can see Soviet anti-colonial posters that call for the liberation of Africa. Now, just imagine Hitler producing such a poster, and By the way, many oppressed colonial people did fight for the Wehrmacht because they shared the same enemy, British and the French, but Hitler would never produce such a poster. He would never promise freedom and racial equality to them because he was disgusted by this proposition of racial equality. If you actually read Mein Kampf, Hitler writes about how much it disgusts him that some liberals propose more equality between the races. To Hitler, that's like a heresy. But and here you can see other posters that also glorify anti-colonial struggle. And by the way, it would actually be very useful for Hitler to engage in this form of propaganda because he was fighting two of the largest colonial empires in the world, the British and the French. So he couldn't utilize on that anti-racist propaganda that Soviets used in order to win against British and French colonialism in Africa. And here you can see a Soviet poster of a communist that's about to punch a Ku Klux Klan member and niet to racism. It says, again, Hitler would never produce such a poster. So in my opinion, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it doesn't prove that Stalinism and fascism are somehow the same. And here I simply have to agree with Henry Kissinger. What Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact does prove is the fact that economic need is often more important than ideology. And according to Henry Kissinger, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact proves that again and again throughout history, economy is more important than ideology. The fact of the matter is the Soviets, they desperately needed German machinery at the time, and Hitler, he desperately needed Soviet oil. And that's why they made the pact, and they both, of course, had imperialist ambitions, and they both wanted to conquer Eastern Europe. And actually they did share the same enemy. For Stalin, the capitalist countries were oppressive and racist and bad, and for Hitler, well, he just wanted to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine from the French and avenge the humiliation of the First World War. So they did share a common enemy. But now I just want to tell you what is Alexander Dugin's take on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and I have to warn you, it is the most bizarre take I ever heard about the 20th century in general. So he wishes for a world, in one of his books, it is called Conspirology, he wishes for a world in which Hitler and Stalin remained allies and destroyed liberalism, the liberal empires of Great Britain, the French colonial empire, the Americans. So he imagines a world without quote this decadent liberalism, and for him it is a better world. Now what's bizarre about it is that even hardcore Russian nationalists like Putin will tell you they are proud of the fact that their motherland defeated fascism. Dugin, on the other hand, will tell you he's sad and that Stalin should have focused on his anti-liberalism, not on his anti-fascism. But Putin also made in one of his speeches a very problematic statement. He said that Poland actually deserved to get conquered, both by Hitler and Stalin, because they took parts of Czechoslovakia with Hitler. And while it is true that Poland actually did take part of Czechoslovakia with Hitler, which is often forgotten, most people don't even know that Poland also engaged in splitting territory with Hitler. But of course I disagree with Putin, because first of all, you can't collectively punish an entire nation for what their government did, and second of all, well, he's an imperialist, Putin that is, and he is just desperately trying to find the justification for conquering Poland once again. And Kadyrov recently also said Poland is next, but I don't actually think that Russians are so crazy as to attack Poland, but I do believe that Putin in his heart of hearts wishes to conquer Poland and restore the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. Here you can see how Hungary and Poland also took parts of Czechoslovakia. But okay, what's interesting is that Trotsky, when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact actually happened, he famously said Stalin has now removed his mask. And pretty much Trotsky implied that Stalin now showed that he is not a true communist, that he is a fascist, which is also a take that some moderate right-wingers share, but of course Trotsky wasn't objective in his critiques. Stalin was his main enemy that killed him just a year later, after Trotsky published his famous critique of Stalin, where he calls him a fascist. But of course I do agree with Trotsky that there is something deeply hypocritical in this alliance between fascism and communism. After all, even Hitler admitted that he saw himself as a hypocrite. But then again, in my opinion, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it isn't the best argument you can make against Stalinism, and in my opinion, it seems that liberals today are somehow convinced that the worst thing that Stalin did was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but I would disagree. How Stalin treated his own people, the resurgence of anti-Semitism, those things I would say are actually much worse. And if I had to find an aspect of Stalinism that reminds me the most of fascism, it is the resurgence of anti-Semitism that happened, not his temporary alliance with Hitler, because let us not forget that this kind of trans-ideological alliances are not that rare in history. After all, United States, they were allied de facto with communist Yugoslavia against the Soviets, in the same way in which the Taliban are allied with China against the United States. So upon closer inspection, I simply have to agree with Henry Kissinger and admit that often in history economy is more important than ideology. But let me also be a devil's advocate for a moment, and let us remember what happened before the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Soviet Union, in the period between 1934 and 1939, was the only great power that engaged in fighting fascism and Japanese militarism. Many brave Americans and British, like George Orwell, also volunteered to fight in Spain, but they did so as individuals. In China, protecting the Chinese skies, 1,000 Soviet pilots lost their lives. And in 1937, in a period between 1937 and 1939, the Soviet Union was the only great power that intervened in China in order to protect them against the Japanese aggression. And that is why communism became so popular in China, because they saw the Soviets as their friendly allies that helped them when they needed their help the most. Then in Spain, the same thing. The Soviet Union was the only great power that officially sent their military. And Stalin, he was a paranoid individual, and Stalin believed, according to Isaac Deutscher, that the Western allies actually want to manipulate him and Hitler into attacking each other in order to weaken Bolshevism, and that is why he refused to sign a alliance treaty with Poland, because he was convinced, well, if I become a Polish ally, all that will happen is Hitler will attack Poland, and then the British and the French, they will just wait for me and Hitler to weaken each other. And then he had this idea, well, maybe I should do the very same thing to the capitalists. Maybe I should sign a non-aggression pact with Hitler, conquer as much territory as I can in order to establish my imperialist ambitions, and Stalin also hoped that while he is consolidating his newly conquered territories, that France and Germany will economically ruin each other in a brutal war. He believed that a repetition of World War I will happen on the Western Front, but due to Manstein's brilliant plan of attacking through the Ardennes, that didn't happen, and that shocked the entire world. But yeah, Stalin never planned for this pact to to actually last, as Alexander Dugin hoped in his book. For Stalin, this was just buying time and hopefully destabilizing both France and Germany, and then he hoped that out of that chaos maybe communist revolutions could occur in both countries, and if not, then he will just conquer, if not both countries, then at least Germany, or as much as he could. And in my humble opinion, the best argument against communism isn't that they engaged in this hypocritical and imperialist alliance with Hitler. The best argument against communism, in my opinion, is that the utopia of Marx was never achieved. And even if you look at workers' rights, well, they were drastically improved if you compare them with what existed in the Russian Empire, but if you compare them with what existed in the social democracies of the West, they were much worse. For example, you couldn't go on a strike in the Soviet Union. You couldn't protest as a worker and demand a higher wage. If you did so, the military would probably shoot at you. So that, in my opinion, is a much better argument against communism. The fact that this utopian vision was never achieved, and also the fact that this utopian, essentially stateless society is supposed to happen after a phase of a dictatorship of the proletariat. And as Bakunin, a famous anarchist, said, well, how the hell is making the state stronger going to create a stateless society? That is the ultimate paradox of communism, and that is why I find the communist utopia to be, well, just a dream that will probably never be achieved. Well, okay, if you like this video, then like, share and subscribe for more videos like this.